All right, hey guys, it's Luke, and I just wanted to talk about as we're getting close to marathon race day. Some of you have already had your fall marathons, but as I'm recording this, we're heading into Chicago and really kind of the big push through November and the first part of December for marathons. And I was reminded by my junior high cross country team, and it got me thinking about some of the things that you all do to yourselves just on a different conversation, right? Like the same idea, just different words being spoken to yourself. But um, yeah, I want to share I want to share a story real quick. So we were at a meet last week, and it was my so some of you know him, Bob Busquirt, who ran for Hanson's. He's a little bit older than me, but he was with the team when I first came in. Olympic trials qualifier in it would have been 2004. And anyway, he moved on from the team. He started a race timing company. He started through the Hanson's running shops, but now it's its own entity, whatever. But anyway, so Bob buys these bibs, the race numbers, right? And so extra bibs that races have left over, he will buy them for a discount, and then the way it's set up with the B tag on the back of the bib, you can do whatever you want with them, whatever. So he just buys these in bulk and uses them for his high school and middle school races that he does, right? So my kids all have like different bibs, and they're bulk of either like old Hanson Invitational bibs, or the one they had was a Lifetime Fitness half marathon from Chicago, right? And it had like these free donut tags on it, and like the free beer tag, you pull it off, you give them the ticket, but this one was donuts, right? And so my kids are just like, they see this and they're like, well, where can I get my donut? I want to get my donut after the race. Why is this say lifetime half marathon? And it was just like boom, boom, boom to me, right? One after the other. And I had like 14 kids just like asking the same question. And I'm like, whoa, shush your little mouths and listen to me. Like, none of this matters. There are no donuts. We are not in Chicago. What makes you think that you're going to get a donut for a race in Chicago? Like, I'm just like, stop talking, be quiet, listen for a second, right? And I was like, you could just see their eyes were just like glazed over with all these questions. Like, and then it turned into like, what teams are here? Who's this? Who's that? And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, none of this matters. None of this is important for what you have coming up in 40 minutes, right? Like, put your bib on, warm up, go to the starting line. That's all you have to be concerned with, right? And so, like, I kind of like had to snap them out of it too. And I literally was like, listen, you guys got to shut your mouths and you got to listen to the words that I am saying to you, right? And it was like, oh, and I'm like, and I get like, and I'm like, but they snapped out of it, right? And they're like, okay, okay, like whatever, like, and I'm like, take a deep breath. What out of this, anything that you're asking me is actually important, right? And it came down to none of it was important, right? And I was getting frustrated, but then I'm like, I always have to take a deep breath. I'm like, okay, like these are literally third through eighth graders that I'm talking to, right? Like their attention span is about 5 seconds, right? And so, we all calmed down, but it was like, guys, just you gotta chill. Like, and they were so worked up. It was like their heart, I didn't even know what their little heart rates were probably. I mean, it was just out of control, but they snapped out of it. And now it got me thinking to like how some of you are at a different level. And I'm not saying like you're at a junior high level, but it's like how much of this is like freaking out about stuff that's either not important or there's nothing you can do about it, right? But my main point with this is like it gets me to thinking like you have a mental fuel tank, right? This is how I kind of describe it is it is a mental fuel tank, right? And that's around a big event. It could be anything, right? It can be anything with like work or life, but in our case, we're talking about running, right? And we have empty all the way to full, right? And so I've heard this analogy and I thought I liked it and it stuck with me. I know some people don't, um, but for me, like, and again, going back to what I tell those kids, right? We're standing on the starting line. I'm like, who's nervous? And they all raise their hands. I'm like, that's good. You should be nervous. You should have some level of nervousness before a race. And I would view that as my idling RPMs, right? If you're sitting in your car and you're sitting at a stoplight, what is that tachometer at, right? Like ideally it's at like 1,000 RPMs, right? If it's revving at 3,000 RPMs and it's making loud noises, that's probably not a good thing, right? Like that is not a sustainable thing. You want something that's low level that can just sit there. It's, you know, it's running, and that being your nervousness and, you know, your level of anxiety around the big event. Like you should have that. It should be at a low level, but it shouldn't be so high that it's going to push you over the edge. It's going to blow your engine. You're gonna have, you know, an unsustainable amount of fuel being burnt, right? Like it's just, you can't be at an unsustainable level. And how many of you are at that unsustainable level? Like, and right now, like I have an athlete who we kind of went back and forth. I mean, he was on the east side of Florida, but yeah, obviously he's worried about like what was going to happen with Milton. And so, you know, and even he was like, finally got to the point where like, okay, well, there's nothing I can do. My first flight got canceled, but I have three other options and I'll just do what I can, right? And so I just feel like a lot of times we get ourselves so worked up and we stay at a high level that by the time the race actually comes, like you're just mentally exhausted, right? And so that's the first part of it. Like you want that level of nervousness to be there and be existent, but be at such a low level that you can function the way you're supposed to, right? And you're not going to be so consumed with that, what is going on, that it's going to consume everything and it's going to be create a problem, you know, if it's left unattended to, right? Is kind of the point I'm trying to make there, right? So that's where you want to be the week going into the race, you know, knowing that it's there, recognizing that it's there, but being able to function at that level and really start to filter out like, okay, you know, the weather's going to be what the weather's going to be. I have nothing I can do about that other than I can prepare with what clothing I bring, what accessories I bring, and I've practiced my fueling and I've practiced my nutrition. I'm going to, and I know what I can handle because I've trained all summer. So that I'll adjust accordingly, right? That's as the extent of it. It's not going to be like, okay, now if it's 60 degrees, I'm going to go out at this pace. If it's 65 degrees, I'm going to go out at this pace, right? You know, like those things are just so minute details and they really are going to be splitting hairs with how you're actually going to perform. Like that's focusing on something that isn't going to impact your performance that much, right? You want it to be focused on high level general things, right? So now going in for the race itself, I think it's you know, we're pulling out of the driveway. What's that? Our car is in gear. What is that RPM level? What is our fuel efficiency here, right? So like I have it as we're hitting the expressway, we're going into a major city rush hour. Like for me, it would be like leaving my home, driving down 696 to I-96 and then heading in towards Chicago, right? Like a lot of that stretch across southern Michigan is going to be pretty boring. There's not going to be a lot going on. And that's exactly what I want. I want to be in cruise control and I want to not have to worry because by the time I leave my home and drive across the state and get into Chicago, it's going to be absolute chaos, right? So my point with that is like the first 20 plus miles of your race should be that expressway drive across boring southern Michigan, where it's just fields and not a lot going on, and I don't have to think. I can just put it on cruise control and run because I know that I'm going to hit Chicago at roughly 5 in the afternoon, and it's going to be absolute chaos. I'm going to have to weave in and out of 5 lanes of traffic. I'm going to be stop and go. I'm going to have to put the blinders on and be focused on what I am doing. And if I've wasted all of my energy across that boring drive and I was stop and go, I was a lead foot, I was weaving in and out of traffic, I was just this and that, then I have created a situation where now I get into Chicago, my fuel tank is on empty because I was so inefficient with how I handled things during the part where I should have just been on cruise control, right? I can't pull off and get gas, right? Like I might be on fumes, right? And you're panicking, you can't make rash decisions, this and that, right? So think about that as you're going into your race, right? Like you want a lot of that race to be cruise control, right? Like you think I've heard, people are bringing up the segment part of it again too. Like I want that first segment of my race to be as big as I possibly can. We're mentally, I'm not wasting a ton of energy, right? Like I know I have a fuel plan, I have a hydration plan. I am prepared for that. I've practiced in my training. I just need to go through the motions here and not waste mental energy. I'm not going to freak out if my goal pace is 8:20. I had a mile at 8:05. I'm not freaking out. I'm just adjusting accordingly. I'm just going back to that 8:20, or I'm just going back to that goal mile. If I'm in a race like Chicago and I know that the first 3 or 4 miles is going to be really congested and I'm not going to waste energy weaving in and out of people just so that I can attempt to maintain uh maintain my pace, right? I'm just going to recognize like it's going to be a little bit of a crapshoot that first stretch, right? But I know that I'll be okay because I trust myself that once I get through that section, I've not wasted energy, I've not wasted needless energy. I'm going to be able to handle it. And then I'm going to be able to chip away. Like if I'm 30 seconds slow, 40 seconds slow, a minute slow, after 5 miles, I realize I still have 21 miles that I can chip away at that, right? If I just chip away 5 seconds the next 10 miles, I'm back on pace and I'm right at half marathon. I'm past halfway and I've still left myself in a position where mentally that when things start getting hard, I've got enough mental energy in my tank that I can make those decisions. I can make sound decisions. I can react if I need to, and I can handle what I'm supposed to handle, right? Because so many times people have wasted that mental energy well before they really should have, right? And so they get to that point. A good example is like, okay, so a person who has fueled properly, hydrated properly, they're in pretty good shape coming into 20 miles. It's going to get hard, right? And it's usually for a lot of people, it's a situation where it's pretty comfortable and then all of a sudden it's not, right? Like you get to 18, you're fine. You get to 20, you're like, oh crap, things just got real, right? And the marathon is like that sometimes. And so you want to be in a position where you hit that point, you've got enough mental energy where you can kind of shift focus and you're like, okay, I'm not thinking about I hit the 20 miles. I'm not thinking like, oh my God, I got 10K left to go. No, you switch that focus like, okay, I'm just focusing on getting to 21. And then that's all I'm thinking about. And then I get to 21, I'm like, I'm getting to 22. And that's all I'm thinking. I'm not thinking so far down the road where it's not manageable mentally, right? Like I can't like a lot of us will be at a point where I can't fathom the idea of going 6 more miles. But if put the blinders on and say, man, I'm just getting to the next mile. That's all thinking about. Or I'm getting to the next aid station. I'm getting to my next bottle. My fueling is in 5 minutes, right? Like that's all I'm thinking about is getting to that fueling. You keep it into something that you can comprehend and you can mentally manage. You're going to be so much better off, right? And if we've wasted all that energy, it's not like we can refill that back up. Once it's gone, it's going to be gone. And so I really want you to think about this. If you've got the rest of this week, or if you've got a couple weeks before your race, like how am I going to manage this mentally, right? And so, like I said, we talk about it in the book. We talk about it in Hanson's Marathon Method books. Like you really want to segment that race out. And to me, the bigger you can make that first segment, the better off you're going to be. How long can I put it into cruise control? Here, what am I going to do with that, right? And so, and then the biggest thing after that is really just shifting that focus into what's manageable, right? And shifting it from like, how much do I have left to where is my next checkpoint, right? And that next checkpoint might be the fueling point. It might be the next mile mark. It might be a landmark that you know on the course. And that's really what it comes down to, right? Because then you can manage that, and you can still stay strong, and you can still stay in a position where you are forcing the issue, right? Because you're going to have a lot of people coming back to you who aren't in the same position that you are. And success will breed success, right? So if you can just if you can keep your focus on what's immediately in front of you, and then you start passing people as they are fading back, the confidence will stay strong. And if the confidence, you can keep the confidence and you can keep yourself mentally in the race, good things will happen. I'm not saying you won't slow down, but instead of just cracking completely and losing a minute, 2 minutes a mile, maybe you can keep that to 10 to 15 seconds a mile, right? And so, that's, I've seen so many races where people have been 1 to 2 minutes up on what they wanted to run, but they've just expended themselves so much to get to that point where they've lost that all in the next mile. They've gotten to 22, they've lost all that cushion they had by 23. And then they mentally see that and they're like, they just deflated, right? And so if you can be in a position where you're still in the game, and you're like looking, oh my gosh, I'm still like there, right? Like I'm not losing all that ground. Like I can still stay in this, and you will be surprised with how much you can pull yourself up, especially that last couple miles, right? Like you can find that strength if you've mentally been able to manage how much you expend throughout the race. So I think that's huge. And I think because when it comes down to it, and just to close here, is so many of you are in really good shape. You're in rockin' physical shape, right? But mentally, um, things just happen along the race, and it's almost like um, it's either expected to happen, or you've gotten to the taper and you've kind of like checked out, right? So sometimes that happens too, but I really just want you to stay mentally engaged, but engaged in what you can control working up to the race. And then once you get, and think about this now, is like, okay, think on previous experiences, think on um, just looking at a course map or whatever. But how much can I expend? Like a lot of you, let's use 16 miles. Your long runs have been 16 miles. Like, you can do 16 miles, or that you can do 10 miles at marathon pace, right? And so maybe that's our first checkpoint, is we're just going to kind of loosely see where we're at. We're going to keep our splits in check, but we're not going to be like, if goal pace is 8:20, we're not freaking out if it's 8:15. We're not freaking out if it's 8:25. We're giving ourselves a little bit of a window there. We're staying in that range, and we're not losing a lot. We're not going to overcorrect one way or the other. We're just going to kind of find the rhythm, be within that range, and then I'll check in at 10 miles, right? So if you can do things like that and get that first segment, push that out as long as you can, I think a lot of you will be able to finish much stronger, right? So ideally, what you have done is you've got a mental strategy game in play, and then ideally you've practiced your fueling and hydration enough so that that is almost second nature to your game plan, right? So first thing is mental, second thing would be having that strategy for fueling and hydration, because that is going to feed into the mental thing too, right? Because if you've not taken in enough carbohydrate, you're not staying hydrated, and you're pulling from those stores, like especially that liver glycogen that is keeping your brain kind of engaged and able to think. If that's not happening, then even if you've done a good job that first block, if you haven't given the brain the fuel it needs to fuel that thinking process, the focus won't be able to be there, right? So those things are going to go hand in hand. So if you can do those two things and then just manage your pacing within a smaller window, I would say 5 to 10 seconds a mile either way, that when it starts getting into crunch time, you are going to be able to manage that discomfort and uh, what's the word I'm looking for? You're going to want to kind of zone out. You're going to want to zone out when you really need to be focused, right? And that's where you need to be at like 2022 is in an ability where like your mind's going to want to just kind of want to shift away from what you're doing, that you can pull it back in and shift on, keep the focus on what you are actually doing, right? And so you can, because you'll get to a point in a race where like you can't really make those computations anymore. Like you see a split and you're like, okay, what does this mean? Oh my, and you can't really do it. If you get to that point, it's gonna, you're in a little bit of trouble, and that's what we want to avoid. So, but in any case, as you approach your race, think about that mental fuel tank. Like what may, even if it's listing it out, like what can I control? What is out of my control? Push that aside, focus on what I can control, and just keep that RPM level low so that that fuel tank is just idling at a low level. You're not burning excess fuel when you don't need to. And then we're talking about mental capacity at that point. And then how you're going to manage that mental capacity through the race, right? And then be in a position where you can draw on what you have left and keep that focus over the last 3 or 4, 6 miles, whatever you have to do to keep your head in the game, stay competitive, stay passing people, not lose those big chunks of time because simply you've mentally run out of gas and you have to just check out. So that's where I would like to see you guys do. Because again, like I said, you're in such good, most of you are in such good shape that a lot of times it will now come down to how this is handled, right? And so ideally you've had to handle that with training, with some harder long runs when you've been tired, with your 10-mile tempos when you've been tired. How have you handled those? How can you adjust your strategy based on how you've handled those workouts? So those are all things I would think about as you approach your race. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. But again, I think for a lot of you, this is what's going to be make or break in how successful you are in your race. Because physically, you're probably there. A lot of it's just how you actually handle the nervousness and the anxiety leading up to a race, especially if you have a big goal for this race. I know a lot of you put a lot of pressure on yourselves to Boston qualify or whatever the case is, run a certain time. And how you manage that is going to manage how successful you are going to be during the race. All right. So good luck to everybody racing. Chicago's this weekend. And then we just keep the train rolling. So I will talk to you all later. All right. Good luck.